we will try to see very briefly, evolution of legislature in India. And when we discuss evolution of legislature in India, we have to understand that we have adopted a system of representative parliamentary democracy in India. I said representative parliamentary democracy. Three cardinal features of our political system: representative parliamentary democracy. Representative institutions or deliberative institutions, by no means entirely it is new to India. If you have some idea, we have evidence of this kind of institutions even in the Vedic period. We have evidence in the Rig Veda, Sabha and Samiti as a deliberative representative body. Vedic political theory recognized dharma, which was close to the modern concept of the rule of law. And we have in our ancient literature evidence of Sangha and Ganrajya. We have evidence of a term called Vinay Dhara, which was actually a modern day speaker of the house, Vinay Dhara. We have evidence of Ganapurak, it was like whip of the modern parliamentary system. Then we have evidence even in the Buddhist literature, voting by tickets, Salak Purusa, Salakha Purusa. So we have these kind of evidence related to legislative institutions, or you can say parliamentary institutions if you can call it. But legislative institutions or parliamentary institutions in their modern connotation, it is actually related to a British period, British rule, right. We cannot ignore the contribution of British in the evolution of our modern legislative institutions, parliamentary institutions. However, try to understand it, however, it would be wrong to presume that the British institutions as such were at any stage transplanted in India. So, we have a long history. Is this okay? So, when you prepare this topic, evolution of legislature in India, you have to understand how this process evolved gradually. What we have to remember, just try to understand it. We have to see how you can say in 1833 Charter Act, there was a humble beginning. So, when you prepare this topic, you have to start this story with Charter Act of 1833, right. So, 1833 acts, then you will see the process of evolution of legislature continued in 1853. 1853 Act, you will see separate legislatures, you can say, and it was actually a birth of mini parliament, right, 1853 Act. So, contribution of 1833 Act, contribution of 1853 Act, then revolt of 1857, and always remember this revolt and the impact of this revolt accelerated the process of evolution of legislature, you can say, in India. And result of this, you will see, 1861 Act. So, 1861 Act played very important role in evolution of legislature in India. Then After that, in 1885, Indian National Congress was established, and it also demanded constitutional reform. Now the demand was association of Indians, you can say, right, in administration, in legislation, in this process of legislation, and therefore there was 1892 Act. So you will see the function of legislature enlarged, right, extension, number of Indians, and then of course the function of the legislature. So you will see the process of evolution of legislature continued even in 1892 Act. You have to remember this development, and then in 1909 Act you will see the process continued, and of course you have some evidence of indirect election, and then 1919 Act bicameralism, right, you will see lower house, upper house, right. So this kind of thing, and then of course the president which later became speaker, then procedural aspect, right, you will see added in our evolution of legislature in 1919 Act. But you have idea about diarchy and how it created problem for the development of, you can say, responsible government in India. And then in 1935 Act also, right, continued this process of evolution of legislature. And after 1935 Act, you all know that how Cabinet Mission Plan 1946, Cabinet Mission Plan. Now Cabinet Mission Plan actually, right, provided for concrete. Of course, in the 1940 August offer also there was a provision of Constituent Assembly, but 1946 Cabinet Mission Plan you have concrete expression of Constituent Assembly, and then, right, this process continued, and then after independence you will see that this, right, the Constituent Assembly actually acquired the, you can say, the function of the Parliament also, and then Mavlankar Committee, and how it tried to differentiate between legislative function and the constitution making function. So 1947, and then you will see our Indian Parliament. Right. So overall, when you will prepare this topic, you have to understand this development. Is this okay? So how you will prepare this? So I said that the first beginning, first humble beginning, first faint beginning of a central legislature for India, you can see in the Charter Act of 1833. So if they ask a question that where you see the seeds of a legislative council, right, so your answer would be 1833 Act. So seeds, right, of a legislative council in 1833 Act, right. So what this act suggested? This act set up one legislative council for all the British territories in India, and introduced an element of institutional specialization by differentiating the law making meetings of the council from its executive meetings. So it was a great beginning. So this demarcation made by the act between the executive and legislative function of the Governor General Council led to the addition of fourth member, legislative member, and Lord Macaulay was appointed, right, to this, to occupy this position, right. So the fourth legislative member, and this was the beginning of the legislative, you can say, council, at least seeds you can see. So your story should start from 1833 Act. Then I said contribution of 1853 Act. The Charter Act of 1853 made important changes in the Governor General's Council. The fourth legislative member was given to right to sit and vote at executive meeting, right. So, full member, and the council was enlarged for legislative purposes by the addition of 6 special members who were now called legislative councillors. Legislative councillors. So, great development in the 1853 Act, legislative councillors. Thus, a big step was taken towards differentiating the legislature from the executive, and it separated, remember this sentence, it separated for the first time the legislative and executive function of the Governor General's Council. This new wing of this council functioned as some constitutional experts suggest, mini parliament. So, this was the origin of mini parliament. This new wing of the council functioned as mini parliament, and procedure of British parliament now also adopted. So, this is the clear cut beginning, evolution of legislation, you can say, or legislature in India. Then, as I mentioned, that 1857 revolt accelerated the process, right. This revolt succeeded in convincing the British public that the India could no longer be governed indirectly through the agency of the East India Company, and it was only after 1857 mutiny that the British started growing parliamentary government on Indian soil, and the result was the Indian Council Act of 1861. So, with the 1861, you will see the process of associating Indians in the law making, you will see begin. 3 Indians nominated, you must be knowing it, Raja of Banaras, Maharaja of Patiala, Sir Dinkar Rao, and now Legislative Council of course emerged as an advisory body for the purpose of legislation. This act is so important that it is considered as prime charter of the Indian legislature, and this act inaugurated the system of legislative devolution in India. And after that, formation of Indian National Congress, and W.C. Banerjee described Congress as National Assembly of India. So, Congress was described as a National Assembly of India, and the Congress was conceived as, you can say, the germ of native parliament. So, some nationalists consider the birth of Indian National Congress as actually the birth of the native parliament. After that, as I mentioned, pressure, demand of Indian National Congress, and then Indian Council Act of 1892 was passed. The members of the council were given right to discuss on the budget, but voting was not allowed, and in this way you can say that this act, 1892 Act, enlarged the function of the council. It also increased the number of additional member, non-official member, and this act is considered as what? Training ground for the future parliamentarians, Some historian consider Gokhale, he started emerging as the leader of the opposition, So, this kind of development you will see after 1892 Act. Then in the Indian Council Act of 1909, you will see that it greatly increased the strength of the Legislative Council, and the number of additional member of the central legislature was raised to 60. It further expanded the function of the council through the powers, you can say different by giving different power, the function how enlarged in at least 3 respect you will see. One, discussion of the annual financial statement. Second, discussion on any matter of public interest. This was very important. Discussion on any matter of public interest, and supplementary question, asking the question, this also, you will see the added. So, in 3 respect at least, function, you can say, of the council, you will see expanded in the 1909 Act, and at the same time the act increased the member of the provincial council also. But 1909 Act of course played important role in the evolution of the legislature, but you know what exactly was the weakness of 1909 Act? Provision of separate electorate, So, real beginning, you can say, is Government of India Act 1919. This was the real beginning in the evolution of Indian legislature. So, the Act 1919 Act marks an important landmark in the evolution of legislature and constitutional history of India. This Act provided for two chambers, bicameral legislature at the center, the lower house, upper house. The lower house was the legislative assembly of 144 members, of which 104 were elected, 40 were nominated with tenure of 3 years. Lower house tenure 3 years, and the upper house was the council of state consisting of 34 elected and 26 nominated member with the tenure of 5 years. So, now you will see lower house, upper house, right. Then for the effective functioning of the legislature in 1919 Act, there was a new post, new institution of a post called president. Now we call this president speaker, but it was president, you can say, for the effective functioning of the legislature, right. So, this act also recommended this post. Then Government of India Act 1935, the process continued, right. You will see, right, this chief presiding officer of the Federal Assembly was now called speaker, right. So, then the provincial legislative council, and then you can say the enlargement of the function. So, 1935 Act, you will see the process continued, and after 1935 Act, as I said, right, cabinet mission plan effectively, right. Before that 1940 also August offer, but actual beginning cabinet mission plan 1946 recommended a constituent assembly to be elected by the provincial assembly by proportional representation, right. So, it was a 389 member body, you must be knowing it, 292 plus 4, 296 and plus 93. So, provincial assembly sending 292, chief commissioner provinces sending 4 and princely state sending 93, right. So, constituent assembly was formed, and the Indian Independence Act of 1947 and particularly the section 8 of Indian Independence Act 1947 conferred on the constituent assembly full legislative power. So, constituent assembly now had legislative power also under section 8 of Indian Independence Act. Then because of this confusion, Mavlankar committee was appointed to maintain distinction between these two functions in August 1947, and after India's independence from Britain in 1947, members of the Constituent Assembly served as the nation's first parliament, right. So, in general, like briefly, this was the story of evolution of legislature in India. Thanks a lot.